Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Professional Engineers Registration Board's webinar for 2021. And as you are seeing, the topic of this registrar is becoming a registered engineer. My name is Colin Porter. I am a member of the board, a member of PERB, and I am also the chairman of the communications committee, which is responsible for this morning's webinar. Now, as most of you may know, the Professional Engineers Registration Board is set up on its mission is to regulate the practicing of engineering in Jamaica. So this morning, we want to spend some time and share some information with you about the board itself and what our mission is and how those persons who are duly qualified can go about becoming registered. And we'll go into details on the importance of having such a registration as a professional. So for this morning, we're going to be covering several topics. But before we get into the topics, I would like to introduce our chairman, Engineer Omar McFarlane Sweeney, just to bring you some quick greetings and to give you a bit of background about PERB. But let me just tell you a bit about Engineer Sweeney before I invite him. As mentioned, he is our current president, our current chairman of the board, being appointed in 2018. He's also a distinguished member of the Jamaica Institution of Engineers and served previously as its president. He is currently the managing director for the Jamaica Social Investment Fund. So I'm going to invite Engineer Sweeney now just to bring some greetings before we get into the webinar. Engineer Sweeney.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Colin, Engineer Colin. And I recognize this morning also other board members, which will speak later on, Engineer Gary Walters, Engineer Michael Heron, Attorney Raquel Forbes, and our registrar, of course, Mrs. Heather Clark. And I want to start it this morning by really thanking you for your interest. I see on the screen here 63 participants, and I think that's a tremendous turnout. I don't know if pre-COVID, we would have seen 63 persons at a meeting like this. And so, you know, COVID has some benefits. The technology that we have embraced have certainly come with benefits that we're able to disseminate this kind of information this morning. As engineers, we are absolutely dedicated to our profession. And so as a board, I'm not going to do the presentation, Mrs. Clark. I'll just speak, just a short greeting I'll do. But I was saying that as engineers, we hold the profession of engineering very dear, and more, certainly in Jamaican society today, we see the importance of engineering as a developing country. And as we embrace the global marketplace and we embrace a workforce and a workplace that is international, we see the importance of ensuring that as a professional practice, the standards are met. And so I'm pleased to be here this morning. And there will be several presentations on how to become registered and how to act in accordance to what we would expect as a regulatory board. And so I greet you this morning with that regard. And I just simply wanted to say to everyone listening that whatever the obstacle that you may face in terms of pursuing your professional registration, the board and the registrar office, we are committed to support your journey, because so many times people are not registered simply because they think that it is an onerous process. And a lot of processes, especially in dealing with government in Jamaica, can be onerous, but PERB is not one of them. what we want to do is to ensure that we can regulate and have an industry that is safe for everyone, and not only safe, but also will allow for fair play and equity in our profession. And so I greet you this morning, and later on, I'm sure after the presentations are made, we will have a question and answer session, and I look forward to also participating in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair, for that wonderful and warm greeting. And also, let me extend my welcome to all the participants, officially as well. So welcome to you. Thank you for your interest in this webinar. And we certainly hope that we will provide you with some of the answers that you may have in your minds as we enter the webinar. So let me just go through a few ground rules before I bring in the first participant. Now, we are having 3 main presenters this morning, and we'll go through the rundown of who they are. After each presentation, we're going to allow a short period of maybe 5 minutes or so, certainly no more than 8 minutes perhaps, for questions. Now, the mode to ask questions is that at the bottom of your screen is a Q&A button. So we're going to ask you to enter your questions in there, not in the regular chat, but in the Q&A section. And if you have your microphone enabled and you want to ask a question vocally rather than type it in, then we ask that you use the raise hand function, wait to be acknowledged, and then ask your question. So we're going to ask you to keep the questions brief though. And but at the end of all presentations, we can have further discussion on any questions which wouldn't have had the opportunity of being asked before, or to give a fulsome answer. I would like to acknowledge other members of the PERB who are in the chat, in the webinar rather. I see Engineer Orette Parker, so I want to say hello to Engineer Parker, and a member of my team, Engineer Julina Swift, is also on board, and I'm sure others will join as the morning progresses. And so we're going to start now with our first presentation, and this will be by Attorney Raquel Forbes, who is a member of the board, and she's going to be talking about legal implications as it pertains to the Professional Engineers Registration Act. Now, Attorney Raquel Forbes is an international maritime lawyer. She's currently employed to the Port Authority of Jamaica. And prior to that, she also worked at the Ministry of Transport and Works, where she worked across the portfolio entities falling under that ministry. Attorney Forbes has a wide experience as a corporate secretary and has served in that role for several entities, including the Montego Bay Metropolitan Company Limited, the Montego Bay Free Zone Company Limited, and the Kingston Free Zone Company Limited. And currently she serves on the board of Visitors for Places of Safety, which falls under the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport. And as I mentioned, she is also a member of PERB, and she sits on the Continuing Education Committee. So I would like now to turn over to Attorney Forbes. Sometimes I want to say Engineer Forbes. We give it that honorary designation this morning, Attorney Forbes. So I will now turn over to you for your presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our discussion here. Let me turn the video off, sorry. Welcome to our presentation on an introduction, familiarization really with the Professional Engineers Registration Board and also the Professional Engineers Registration Act. So you will hear me referring to PERB, which is short for the Professional Engineers Registration Act, and to PERB, which is short for the Professional Engineers Registration Board. And Mrs. Clark, could you assist me by sharing your screen with the presentation, since I'm joining from my cell phone, unfortunately. If you could assist me, I would appreciate it. So our presentation, my presentation this morning is really specific to the role of PERB and why it matters to you, and more widely, the role of PERA and why that should be of interest to you in this noble profession. Mrs. Clark? Can you put up the presentation, please, the PowerPoint?
She's looking for it.
Okay, thank you. All right. In the meantime, I can share with you that it's of interest to me when I went through the Act, that there's no definition in the Act for an engineer. The Act, in fact, doesn't recognize an engineer, but recognizes a registered engineer. And in my opinion, that says it all and shows really the importance of being registered under the Act. Okay, so we'll get started. This presentation was actually prepared by a former member of the board, an attorney at law, Miss Nicole Berger. And I am the one who is currently the attorney currently on the board who will be making the presentation today. So we'll step right in. Okay, the professional registration, Professional Engineers Registration Board is established by virtue of Section 3 of PERA. And remember now, PERA is the Act and PERB is the board. The board consists of at least 5 persons and no more than 9 persons. And most of these persons, as you would appreciate, are engineers. It's a requirement that most of these persons would be engineers. Members are appointed by the minister that is in charge of PERB, currently the Ministry of Transport and Works, and members can serve for 2 years, but they can also be reappointed. Okay, let's look now at the functions of the board. The main functions of the board is to register engineers so that these engineers will become registered engineers. And as I said earlier, engineers is not defined in the Act. It's registered engineers, and it's defined as a person who is registered under this Act to carry on the practice of engineering. And the practice of engineering is also defined, and it means the rendering of or offering to render any service or work, the performance of which requires education, training, and experience in the field of engineering, and the application of knowledge in the mathematical, physical, and applied sciences to such service or work. All right, so PERB is to register engineers. PERB is also to determine categories of registration. PERB is to regulate the practice of engineering in Jamaica. And PERB is to, go back a little, Mrs. Clark, thank you. And PERB is also to maintain acceptable standards of professional conduct by registered engineers. Very important. Okay, who is an engineer? PERA only, in PERA, which is the Act, it provides that only persons who are registered under the Act are entitled to use the designation engineer. So regardless of your training, regardless of your experience, regardless of where you work, regardless of your education, you cannot use the designation engineer, registered engineer, unless you're duly registered under the Act. Okay, so no one should really be referring to you as Engineer Brown, Engineer White, unless you're duly registered. Also, the use of any letters, putting on your letterhead that you're an engineer, using the title, putting on a sign that is erected on a building, it means that you would have to have been registered on the PERA, which is the Act, in order to use that designation. Okay, we look now at the powers of the board, the powers of PERB. Next slide, thank you. In addition to the functions of the board is given certain powers to aid them in carrying out specific functions. The board has the power to appoint examiners to conduct examinations of persons who are seeking to be registered under PERA. Also has the power to prescribe procedures to discipline engineers and to appoint a disciplinary committee to hear any infractions in the profession, the power to do things that are necessary to carry out all the general functions that we went through before. Okay, registration. Now let's look at how you become registered, because I'm sure you're very interested in that. Now, if you fulfill one or more of the following requirements, then you can be registered by the board, registered under the Act. If he's a member, you're a member of, or you hold a certificate granted by an institution that is recognized by the board as having competence to approve qualification as an engineer. Now, you would appreciate that that institution doesn't have to be a local institution. It can be an institution from another jurisdiction as well. Additionally, if you're a holder of a certificate recognized by the board as indicating competence in engineering work, and you have at least 2 years practical experience in that category of engineering, of which at least 1 year was obtained in Jamaica or another member state. Member state here means CARICOM member state. Then that would also make you entitled to submit an application to be registered. And the application is in a prescribed form that is also attached to the regulations. So there's a format that it must have. Okay, there are also different categories of registration. You can be registered temporarily, or you can have special registration. Temporary registration, what if you are a resident in another jurisdiction and you need to conduct or engage in a project here in Jamaica? Then yes, you would need temporary registration, but you do not intend to live here. You're just coming here for the 6 months or the 1 year, the duration of that specific project. Like we're going to the Chinese building a highway or anything like that, and you're an engineer for that company who won the tender, then you would of necessity seek temporary registration, and the PERB also carries out those specific functions as well. So you can apply for temporary or for special registration, and special registration is permitted for the holders of certain specified public positions, and the Act, the regulation set out some of those special positions, okay? PERB also registers not only individuals, but also registers organizations. Engineering organizations can be registered, and it's a requirement that the organization must demonstrate that they have a registered engineer who will be in charge of or supervising the work in the category that the organization is seeking to be registered in. Disciplining, that's another main function of the board. Now, the Act provides for the disciplining of registered engineers. Section 18 of the Act requires the appointment of a disciplinary committee comprising registered engineers who are not members of the board because of perceived conflict of interest issues. So once there's to be appointed a disciplinary committee, then PERB will appoint that committee, and the members of that committee will not be also members of PERB. The disciplinary committee investigates and hears evidence in relation to matters concerning the conduct of registered engineers or organizations, registered organizations. Okay. What about breaches? What does the Act say about what breaches that you can engage in that would be contrary to the provisions of the Act? Examples are fraudulent procurement of registration. So let's say, for example, hypothetically, you have a certificate from diplomamail.com, and it's not, you actually did not attend that institution, but you procured a certificate and you're passing off as if you're a graduate of that institution, and you use that certificate to procure registration, that is a breach that the Act recognizes. Dishonesty, negligence, or incompetence on the part of the individual, disgraceful or improper conduct in a professional respect, carrying on the practice of engineering without a valid practicing certificate. And that is what we are here about today. We want to ensure that you are aware that it is a breach of the Act to carry on the practice of engineering without a valid practicing certificate. And that also means that if you were issued one initially, it doesn't take you, it's not for your lifetime. It's something that you'll have to renew, and you ought not to be practicing unless you have gone through that annual renewal, okay? Where the board finds that a breach has occurred, the board can censor or reprimand the engineer, suspend the engineer, impose conditions, or the board can cancel the registration of the engineer or the organization that is duly registered. And of course, as in all acts where you have registration and where you have disciplinary committees and actions being taken against individual persons, must have a right of appeal by virtue of the Constitution of Jamaica. So if persons are aggrieved by a decision of the board, whether in respect of registration or a disciplinary order, then that person can appeal the decision of the board or the decision of the disciplinary committee at the Supreme Court by virtue of an appeal to the Supreme Court. Okay, another very important aspect of your registration is that upon being registered, an engineer is issued with a seal. The engineer is required to seal all final engineering drawings, plans, design, notes, estimates, bill of quantities required to be sealed. Reports conveying an engineering opinion must be sealed. Any aspect of the work that you're going to give to the public as a final work, as your work that is representative of your calling, your training, that work must bear your seal. Now, you can only get that seal if you are duly registered under the Act. The purpose of the seal, is when you're signing a document, it must also be sealed, okay? And it certifies that it is your work and it's completed and it's adequately performed. You can go to the other slide, please, Mrs. Clark. Every registered engineer responsible for carrying out or approving engineering work must ensure that it is certified by a seal, because that is really the seal that distinguishes you from an unregistered engineer, okay? Very important. How do you seal a document? It is to be conspicuously placed on the document, okay? And the seal cannot stand on its own. The document must be signed by you, and the document must also be dated. Very important. Where the project involves more than one category of engineering, the document must be sealed by a registered engineer for each discipline that is done under this project, okay? It's very important that you protect your seal. Next slide, please. You're not to permit, for example, an unregistered engineer or any other person really to use your seal. And that is why you need to sign as well. It's not just the seal, okay? And the seal remains the property of PERB, and PERB has the right, if your registration is canceled or suspended, to ask that you hand that seal over to the board for safekeeping until you rectify that situation. And of course, you'd appreciate where you have temporary or special registration. Then once you leave that post for that special registration, you'll have to hand over the seal. And once you leave the jurisdiction, if you came in as a temporary registrant, then you have to hand over the seal as well. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And if you have any questions, then I'll be happy to assist you in any way I can.
Thank you very much, Attorney Forbes, for that presentation. And I'd just like to apologize for the format. We're having a little bit of technical issues getting the slideshow to show in the format that we would have preferred, but hopefully we rectify it over presentations going on. I have 3 questions here in the chat. I'm gonna read them out now, and then we'll take them as we go. So the first question is from Javon, right? White. I hope I'm pronouncing your first name correctly, Javon. He says, good morning. I have a bachelor in chemical engineering, and I am currently employed as a chemical environmental health specialist at a power plant. I work on chemistry-related projects as they arise in conjunction with persons in the maintenance department. How could I obtain a PE license, as you put it, but really your registration with the following restrictions? I'm not sure what those restrictions are, Javane, but as we go along, I think this is something that will become much clearer to you as we go along in terms of how you go about obtaining your PE. But based on the presentation from Engineer Forbes, you would have heard some of the basic requirements. I don't know if you want to just repeat some of those for Javane here from Raquel in terms of the requirements.
Just to correct you, though, I don't mind being an engineer, but unfortunately, I'm an attorney.
Yeah, sorry. It
No,
may
that's
just
fine. All right. The requirements must be that you're a member of or hold a certificate granted by an institution recognized by the board as having competence to approve qualification as an engineer. 1, that he's the holder of a certificate recognized by the board as indicating competence in engineering work and has had at least 2 years practical experience in the same category, of which at least 1 year was obtained in Jamaica or another member state.
Okay, so I hope that gives you some insight of it. And there's another question by Gerald Brown. Gerald says, I'm an assistant lecturer for 1 year and 11 months. And I have 1 year and 8 months experience in as a process operator in the industry. I also have a bachelor's degree in engineering. Am I able to be registered as an engineer? As you would have heard a while ago, Gerald, that you need to have 2 years experience in order to be qualified. So
practical, not just experience, but practical
practical,
experience.
Very importantly, practical experience. So that 1 year and 8 months that you have in industry, if you get a few more months, at least 4 more months with the type of experience that would be recognized by the board, then that would make you eligible for registration. But as we go through the other presentations, we'll share more details for you that will determine your suitability for registration. All right, so thank you very much for those 2 questions. And here are 2 more questions from Ryan Anderson. The first, I was previously started the process of registering for PE. I have more than 2 years experience. However, I was told by another PE that I would require postgraduate qualification to get through. Is that true? That's a very good question and something that a lot of people ask all the while. So I don't know if you want to take that, Raquel or Gary. Would you like to take that one, or shall we wait until your presentation? Because I think this leads over into your presentation.
You can wait.
Okay, so Ryan, if you don't mind us waiting, when we go through the presentation and requirements for registration, then this hopefully your question will be answered here. And here's one from an anonymous attendee. It says, good morning. I studied in Russia and hence received my degree from a Russian institution. I would like to know if this institution would be recognized by PERB and if it's possible to receive the license. Again, I think this will be addressed in the next presentation, person who studied in Russia. So if you don't mind waiting until that presentation, then we will get to that point and you perhaps could get your answer there. And then finally, I'm going to close after this one, is a question from Jermaine Jackson, who says, good morning. I've worked on several projects since joining NWC 1995. How should I present this on an application? Again, Jermaine, this is something that I think will come up in the next presentation, so that you can just wait, and then hopefully your answer will be provided there. But if not, then during the next round of questions, then we can go ahead. And okay, I'm seeing the questions rolling in very quickly. Let me take them quickly so we can move to the presentation. Here's a very good question, I think, from Kareem Campbell. Does the PERB supersede the present Electrical Act? Raquel?
I need more details on that. In what way? What aspect of it? Because it wouldn't supersede it. There are two different pieces of legislation, meaning as it pertains to what? Electrical engineering, the requirements, has to be more detailed.
More detail, right. So Kareem, right, so it needs more detail. But as Raquel mentioned, the PERB is a different act from the Electrical Act. And PERB is concerned with regulating the engineering profession.
Generally.
Generally. So where the Electrical Act made it very specific about certain electrical activities with a generation or so on, with electricity, right? He says here that electrical engineering and being able to approve electrical works. I think I have an idea where you're getting at with the new requirement from the government electrical inspectorate and the new format it has taken. I think there is a requirement for some classes of persons registering to be electrical inspectors to be professionally registered engineers. So I think maybe that's what you're alluding to, Kareem. But the two acts are different, but there may be some requirement in the Electrical Act that inspectors are duly qualified and registered by the appropriate body in order to be an electrical inspector. And very quickly from Marvin Moore, does PERB recognize practical work experience outside of CARICOM and USA specifically for registration?
It doesn't appear so, because Section 9 of the Act, let me go back to it. Section 9 of the Act says that he is the holder of a certificate recognized by the board as indicating some competence in this, indicating some competence in some category of engineering work and has had at least 2 years practical experience in that category, at least 1 year of which is in Jamaica. So in other words, that is it. Yes, if you have that practical experience outside of Jamaica, even 20 years, as long as at least 1 year of that is either Jamaica or a member state. That's what the Act says. And has passed such examinations as may be required by the board. So it's actually threefold. Okay, that's that particular requirement. So you must have 1 year here in Jamaica or a CARICOM member state.
Okay, thank you very much, Raquel. And the final two questions that I will field before moving on, and I'll take them in this order. And anonymous attendee as also, since one cannot be called an engineer until registered, what does one put as their job title working in the field until then?
A job title is a bit different though, you know, because your job title is your employer that gives you that job title. And I don't know if employers being in the business of giving employers, an employer won't call you a nurse if you're not a nurse. You get what I'm saying? They find some other fancy thing to call you. However, for you to have the designation of a professional engineer, you must be registered under the Act.
Right.
So your job title is different. Your job title is something that is different.
Right. And your job title would also speak to the fact that you have studied engineering, you have qualified or meet the requirements of being an engineer, but until registered, then you're entitled to call yourself professional engineer.
Right.
And the final question here from Richard Lawrence. Good morning, Richard. Has PERB considered work in conformity assessment, which includes testing of engineering materials as source of experience to be registered? And that, I think, when Gary does his presentation, Richard, we can look at that, because the engineering experience that we look at is wide and varied. Design plays a very important role, but also there are other technical details of engineering, depending on the category that you seek to be registered in, that would be considered. And as long as it can be demonstrated that it has enough engineering activity involved, then that will be considered. So as we get into the next presentation, I think the answers will become more apparent to you as well as to the others who have asked questions. So, right, so thank you very much for all those questions. Thank you very much, Raquel, for both your presentation and providing the answers here this morning. So at this point, we are now preparing for our second presenter, who is Engineer Gary Walters, and he is the chairman of our credentials committee, as well as a member of the registration board. Gary is a senior project manager with the National Water Commission, and he holds his degree in civil engineering and a master's in business administration from University of Manchester. And Gary has quite a bit of experience working in several projects involving potable water supply and wastewater projects. And he sits on the board of the National Heritage Trust, the Heritage Development Review Committee, and he sits on the board of trustees for the NWC pension plan. And he is also a past member of the Jamaican Institution of Engineers. So in his role as member of PERB and the chairman of the credentials committee, I now hand over to Engineer Walters for his presentation.
All right, thank you, Engineer Porter. Ms. Clark, can you allow me to share my screen?
I think your presentation is up here. Is this it? Is this it?
Oh.
Your presentation is up.
Then can I get the next slide, please? Good morning. Good morning, all participants. The questions so far are quite interesting, and I've taken note of them and the specific nature of some of them as it pertains to experience, which I will incorporate into my response. Now, to be registered a professional engineer in Jamaica, you must be a national of Jamaica or national of a CARICOM state, and you must also be ordinary resident in Jamaica. You must have good character, hold a certificate qualification as an engineer recognized by the board, and the program must be accredited. As pertains to accreditation of programs, we normally consult with the University Council of Jamaica. So the programs from Russia, Israel, Nigeria, United States, the UCG is what accredit programs, and including the ones from Cuba as well. And that is what we use to guide the accreditation process. You must also hold qualification indicating competence in engineering work, which we will expound on later. And you must have minimum 2 years practical experience, at least one must be in a CARICOM state. As it pertains to being a national, yes, you can be a national of another country and still be registered, but registered under a different category. We have different categories of registration. We have temporary and special registration as well. Next slide. All right, the application has a checklist. You must have an application form. Your proposer, who is to be a professional registered engineer in the category for which you're applying, or at least in one of the categories for which you're applying, because it is possible for you to apply for different categories. For example, you can apply for civil and structural. You can apply for sanitary and chemical. You can apply for electrical and energy. You can apply for construction. So your proposer, and good standing means that they would have paid their registration fees, up to date to their registration fees. So the proposer, as I said, must be registered in the category for at least one of the categories for which you're being proposed. The portfolio of projects must be signed by the proposer or a professional engineer that can attest to the project. So to respond to Jermaine Jackson, who has experience from 1995, you would be, in addition to the application form, which you can get from our website, there is a spreadsheet which you can complete and provide all of the projects you've done. So if you've done over 100, you may wish to present all 100, or you may present those that you believe clearly demonstrate your competence to carry out engineering services and works on your own. So you can determine how much of your works you wish to present, but the aim is to demonstrate competence. A passport size picture that must be verified by a justice of the peace. The curriculum vitae should be initialed by your proposer. The organizational chart for your entity where you're employed. And of course, the copy of qualification, degrees and certificates that you present, we would just wish to see the original at the time you're making your submission, but we will not keep your originals. You will just present them to show that they're originals. More information is available on the PERB's website. So this is a flow chart illustrating the flow chart illustrating the process. So you complete and submit the form, and you pay the required application fee. The application is reviewed at the PERB's office, just going through the checklist. If you provided all the information, you will move to the next step. If not, you're advised what information is outstanding, and until you've provided all the information. Having received the application, the applicant is invited to do the PERA and the code of conduct test. So far, the registration process involves 2 tests on ethics and the Professional Engineer Registration Act. And once you complete the test, your application will be submitted to the Credentials Committee for review. Credentials Committee will then examine your application in keeping with the requirements for registration. And then a recommendation would be made to the board for acceptance in the categories that accepted or rejection for the categories. There are some instances where an interview is done if if based on the information presented, it's deemed appropriate to get further and better information on your experience as an engineer or your qualification. Next slide. PERB, as I said, has 4 classes of registration. Professional engineer is the one where it must be a national. The special registration, the university person who says they have 1 year and 8 months of experience. There is the facility where under the Professional Engineer Registration Act, special registration is extended to certain categories of engineering employment. So those at university who lecture, those who by nature of their job in the government service, like for example, the Kingston and St. Andrew Municipal Corporation, they have a city engineer, and the other municipal corporations as well, and they can be a special registration to that. You may work at another government entity, whether it be the works agency, the water commission, or wherever, where you are the chief engineer, and you can get a special registration from that job. When you leave that job, that special registration will cease. Temporary registration is for non-nationals normally who would have come into Jamaica to work. And it's temporary because they would have been here for a particular length of time. Certainly to be that temporary registration, you need to have a work permit as well, so that we know you're legally allowed to carry out work in Jamaica. And authorized organization. An organization, so you can be an individual and you may have your own consulting firm, and that firm is required to be registered to carry out engineering services. So all the consultants, so in addition to your individual registration, if your firm, if you have a firm that is also carrying out engineering services, it behooves you to get registered. Next slide, please. Ms. Clark, can you just share the screen so that I can? All right, categories of registration. We currently have 46 categories of engineering disciplines, but the Professional Engineering Registration Board is in the process of reviewing some of these categories, and the categories are listed below. We can move on, please. All right, we already, as I stated about authorized organization, must be duly incorporated, registered with the Companies Office of Jamaica, and their articles and certificates of incorporation must also accompany the application, and they must demonstrate. So, like the registration for individuals, the firm can apply under different categories. And if they're applying for civil and they're applying for electrical, they need to also have a civil engineer on record and an electrical engineer on record who would be able to carry out those services on behalf of the firm. Now, the professional registered engineers, we maintain a database, and you can get access from this to this database from the PERB website. And you may also call the PERB's office in the event that there are some challenges getting this information. This database is important not just for our current registered engineers, but other entities that receive work from engineers. Now, I just want to state that when you register as a professional engineer, your very first certificate is your registration certificate. That is the one that you will keep for the rest of your life. Then each year you're issued a practicing certificate. So the practicing certificate has the year as a watermark in the background. And this is what you use to demonstrate that you're currently registered to practice for that particular year. So it's two certificates, as I said. One is your registration certificate, and then you get a practicing certificate for each year. Ms. Clark, next slide. All right, thank you. I hope I have sufficiently answered some of the questions, failing which, Colin, you will direct me to the ones that I have not answered.
Yes, Gary, thank you again for the presentation. I have 3 questions in here, one of which was posed previously, so I'll repeat it from Ryan Anderson, who states that he previously started the process of registration for PE, and he has more than 2 years experience. However, he was told by another PE that I would require postgraduate qualification to get through. He wants to know if that is true.
No, that is not true. You don't need postgraduate qualification. What you need is experience. But that is provided your first degree. Your first degree is an engineering degree, and having attained that engineering degree, minimum 2 years. Now, 2 years experience is where the intricacies of the evaluation process comes out. So there are some persons who haven't graduated, they have been working, and they've only been working, for example, on construction sites. Just give you an example. So all they have done, they have been doing construction engineering and construction management, and they want to be registered in civil. Now, your construction experience does carry some weight, but we need to remember that your registration allows you to carry out engineering works, and in particular design. Now, if you've never done any design, haven't graduated, it would be difficult based on your construction experience alone to get registration in civil. So that is a challenge that some applicants face, notwithstanding that they have a first degree in civil engineering. A next challenge that some of the applicants face is that they have a first degree that is not in engineering. They may have a first degree in project management or construction engineering, and they go off to do a master's in civil engineering. A master's in civil engineering, when you look at the course content, it is not equivalent to a bachelor's of science in civil engineering. The courses, it does not cover the full gamut of courses in civil engineering. A master's in civil engineering leads more heavily on the management and contract administration part of civil engineering, and does not go in depth in the in the fundamentals of engineering. So in summary, you do not necessarily need post-qualification studies.
All right, thank you, Gary. Ryan was following up. He mentioned that your presentation spoke to two separate qualification/certificate just now. I don't know if you want to clarify that quickly before I move on to the next question. Separate qualification/certificate just now. I'm not sure what that is, Ryan. But
no, all right, Ryan, I believe what Ryan is, we need to recognize that when you go to different universities throughout the world, we're used to what we call a Bachelor of Science, a degree. I think in parts of Europe, they would call a degree a diploma. And so I think at the time when the act was being drafted, they wanted to recognize that persons would have been studying all over the world. So it doesn't clearly say it's a degree, it's an appropriate qualification depending on where you come. So there are instances where the diploma is what they call that qualification. So it is it's just to allow the varying instruments that students may be issued on completion on a course of engineering study.
Okay, I'm going to ask two questions in one here. I'm not sure if I'm the same person, they're anonymous. But the first part is, can a professional engineer be registered in multiple categories, which I think you mentioned? And is there a different application process for this? And someone else who is anonymous asked that if metallurgical engineering is recognized here, as they didn't see it on the list of categories that we mentioned. But the first part, can persons register in multiple categories? And is there a different application process for doing that?
Yes, you can be registered in multiple categories. However, it is expected that you would have the relevant qualification. What you find is that, for example, civil engineering is the broad category. So you can be registered in civil, you can be registered in structural, you can be registered in construction, you can be registered in sanitary. Those are all related, and the civil would be the broadest one. Now, if you have no qualification in electrical, it's a difficult sell for you to have a degree in civil and say you want to be registered in electrical. And because there's absolutely no overlap. There is an overlap with particular categories of engineering. So the electrical and the mechanical will have an overlap. It does not necessarily mean that a mechanical can be registered as electrical, no, because you may not have the qualification. But the subcategories, if I like to call them, for example, sanitary. A chemical engineer can be registered in sanitary. A chemical engineer can be registered in environmental. A civil engineer can be registered in environmental. A civil engineer can also be registered in sanitary. So that is where you may have that type of overlap, because these are also subsets. Why we have these breakout, you may find that persons haven't attained their, and courses of studies to has also changed. Universities all over the world, persons can now go and do a degree in environmental engineering. They can do a degree in water resources engineering. They can do a degree in electronics engineering. So for those who have chosen to specialize at that early, it would not be accurate for you to have a degree in environmental engineering or sanitary engineering and register you as civil, because you would not have covered the transportation engineering, structural, you would just geotech, you would not have done enough to warrant that broad category of civil. And that's why we have broken down some of those categories like that. So it is indeed possible.
And the second part, Gary, to that was, is it a single application process for multiple categories, or is it different registration, different applications rather?
You may do it on one application form. You may be registered in the year 2012, and in 2014 you want to add a category, you can also do so. But if the first time you're applying, you can do it on the same form. But it's important to know that for each category that you want, you must have qualification and experience.
Okay, thank you for that. So moving along, I have several more questions here. And Gerald Brown is asking, can engineering lecturers or assistant lecturers be registered as an engineer? I think you had touched on that with a...
Yes, they can. Once they have the qualification and they're lecturers, not only are they lecturing university students, they would have done papers, they would have done other assignments that can demonstrate their competence in engineering. So we would look at that because they're so notwithstanding that they may not be, and some of them do design work, but irrespective of that, it is what they've been lecturing, what papers they have contributed to, that would lead us to register them as a PE. Notwithstanding, if they fall short in any way, they can still be registered under the special registration.
Thank you, Gary. And just to give a clarification, follow-up answer to the person who asked if metallurgical was recognized. I think Mrs. Clark had shared the screen where, yes, that is one of the categories which is recognized by PERB. So if you have a metallurgical engineering degree, then you can be registered. Move along quickly now. And this is a question that I may even have to ask the chairman to assist us in answering this one, Gary, but and I'll put it to you first. Isn't the special registration a technical loophole? And this is from Courtney Curry. Isn't the special registration a technical loophole that allows for one who is not properly trained as an engineer to be registered? For example, the KSAMC hire a person as a civil engineer who hasn't completed any engineering training.
Attorney Forbes, I hope she's still there, but I believe that, in our parliamentary system, when they pass laws, they try and account for situations. And you may have had, when it was passed, that persons recognize that persons may have been in the position carrying out the job and may not have had the qualification that we were now putting into the law. And it was a way to, for want of a better word, grandfather them in. Nowadays, it's very rarely that any entity would elevate someone to be in a position, a senior engineering position like that, a chief engineer for the works agency, a chief engineer for the city engineer. Because what we're finding now, the majority of the municipal corporations, those who perform the function as, I think the city engineer is a KSAC terminology. The others are called roads and work superintendent. The majority, and I dare say over 90% of them, they have a qualification in engineering from a recognized tertiary institution. So their experience, however, may be not what we're looking, because it's not I hope I don't get myself in trouble. A lot of them are recent graduates. We know that maybe the pay is not attractive to get a PE off the bat. So recent graduates, but they do have the qualification. And they put them in those particular positions. I believe that over time, the need for special registration will diminish.
If I may, it's a special group of registration, and it's not a circumvention because it's not as if they don't require registration. The act says clearly that it's a category of persons who may be specially registered as engineers. And then it details the categories, the various categories. So it's not in my opinion, based on the question, it's not a circumvention of being registered because you still need to be registered. But the drafters of the law at that time determined that these persons, whether by virtue of the work that they do, you know, what they're called upon to do, because when I look at the list, and it is an exhaust, I mean, it's a list that you know, it's not exhaustive then. So it's not any and anybody who would fall under there. If you're not specially mentioned under that second schedule, then you can't be specially registered. But given the persons that they have named there, it's obvious that it's persons either employed to the government of Jamaica, with the parish council, or the central government, as well as staff at the various universities or institutions, that they recognize that these persons, because of what they're engaged in day to day, can be specially registered. And other acts recognize professionals who are in the employ of the government, who are given special mention, who are taken out of the general hold. So it's not a circumvention, in my opinion.
And if I may add, when we did some research on this, there are, in the state of Florida, there are certain counties that also allows registration based on your government job within the county or the state. So it's not a unique thing to Jamaica.
All right, thank you very much for those responses, and thank you, Courtney, for asking that. A very heavy question, and certainly one that we hope have shed some light on. Moving along very quickly, again, someone is asking, he says this person says they are a mechanical engineer already working. Is this illegal? Do I need to do an exam to get this certificate? I assume by certificate you mean to be registered. And then there's a follow. What certificate granted by an accredited institution is HART NTA one of these institutions?
All right. If you're currently working and you're working under a registered engineer, you're not doing anything illegal. If you are, and it depends on what part of engineering you're performing. If you're preparing designs and drawings for construction, and neither you nor your superiors are registered, then yes, you are breaking the law. Because we need to recognize that there is the ability for an engineer to work under the supervision of a professional engineer, who, with any work you do, he's the one that would take responsibility for it, because he is the professional engineer of record. If it is that you are, if you're solely involved in construction, with construction, you may receive drawings designed by others, and others could be a professional engineer. You're not breaking the law in that instance.
Right, so it depends on what exactly you're doing that determines whether you're breaking the law or not.
Yes, because that engineer would have done the drawings and submitted it for you now to construct. He is the supervising engineer for all intensive purposes, even if part of his assignment does not involve supervising your work. But he is the one that would be the engineer of record.
Of record.
You're now only constructing works designed by others.
Okay. Thank you for that, Gary. And just to answer the second part, Hart NTA is not one of the recognized institutions. Certainly not recognized by PERB, as they don't offer any engineering programs as far as I know. Next question is from Engineer Alfrico Adams. Good morning, Engineer Adams, Vice President of the GIE and past PERB board member, if I remember correctly. And Engineer Adams asks, are there any of all, excuse me, are there any of our developed colleague countries who require as little practical and professional experience as 2 years to be considered for application as a registered engineer?
Yeah, this is something that this current board and I believe past boards have had a difficulty with. The 2 years seems insufficient, and we believe that 4 years should be the requirement, and it can go down to 2 years if you've had postgraduate studies. That is what we believe would be best. But at this time, this is what the Act allows. And that is why the experience that we examine on the credential committee, we make sure that you demonstrate experience across a broad spectrum of that particular discipline. The experience can't solely be, as Engineer Art Parker would say, especially for the electrical applicants, all the experience is in electrical house wirings, and you want to, he likes to see transmission and distribution, or at least a broad spectrum to show that you have appreciation for it. So showing competence in one area of that particular discipline is not sufficient. And it's same for the mechanicals as well. You must show broad experience. And I cannot reiterate enough, emphasis on your design competence. However, the construction is also considered. But to put it simply, if all your experience is on construction, you will struggle. However, if all your experience is in design, you will, and it's sufficient design across the broad spectrum, you ought not to have any difficulties, right? But if you have both design and construction across the broad areas, then you won't have any issues.
All right, thank you, Engineer Gary. And here's a question from Xavier Hall, who said he kind of joined late and he wants to know if a recording of the session and slides can be sent to him by email. I don't think we'll be sending out anything there individually, Xavier, but we're recording the webinar and we're going to look at posting it on our YouTube page. The PERB has a YouTube page which we're actively populating, and this webinar, I think we should be streaming on it. I'm not sure if that is happening right now, but we certainly will be posting it on our YouTube page, and we will send out, because I think we have the email addresses if you had registered for this, that then we can share that information with you where to access the webinar after we have completed the session here. So another question I'm moving through very quickly. Marvin Moore asks, would PERB accept a registered professional engineer proposal to sign off on civil and structural design experience done in the US?
What the last part?
Done, with having experience done in the US? In the USA, right?
remember that your proposer must be a registered engineer. Now, if your proposer speaks to the design, if the design expert is in the USA, and the engineer in the US, for example, who is signing off on it, because your proposer is the one that will have to sign off on your work. The proposer is still a PE. I expect the proposer to act ethically and with morals. He ought not to be signing off on something on an applicant that he knows the information is not accurate. We do not expect that from any of our PEs. So you having studied in the States and he wishes to propose you, he needs to satisfy himself that the experience that you have there, that you said you gained in the States, right? He can do it a number of ways. He may speak to the person who supervised you over there, or he may, and then say, okay, or he may speak to the applicant and ask them about the experience, and he would sign off and say, yes, this is a true record of his experience. But the engineer in the state is not the one that will be signing off on the experience. It is the local PE who would satisfy himself that you have that competence.
Sorry, moving along quickly here. Can engineering graduates employed as chemists or environmental officers be registered as PE, even if no one at their company has a PE? All
right. Being a scientist, so a degree in physics, chemistry, biology, and this is where it gets a little gray.
The person said, I have an engineering, they're an engineering graduate over here, but they're just employed as chemist or environmental officer.
A chemist?
I suppose that would be a job title.
All right. So they have the qualification. They need to demonstrate engineering experience. I don't know, unless they're working with probably 3M and creating new material that is durable. It depends on what they're doing, because the material science part, which is what I think Richard Lawrence was raising, it's what they're doing. If you're just in a lab doing doing like BOD and phosphorus and fecal coliform, that's insufficient. That's not sufficient experience to demonstrate competence in engineering. So it would require more. It would require more information. I don't know what type of chemist work you're doing, but the working in that type of environment and doing material testing, and it depends on what the ultimate product is. But if you're just receiving samples from a wastewater facility and then you test it for, I don't believe, that is insufficient. That you need complementary engineering experience with that.
Right, and it shouldn't matter whether anyone else in the company is a PE or not, because this is based on your own individual experience.
Mm-hmm.
And Richard,
I want to add this though.
Mm-hmm.
So, like UWI, you can get a degree in electronics. You can get a degree in electronics engineering. They are not the same, right? So those of you who get a degree in electronics and thinks that equivalent to electronics engineering is not the same, because there is the engineering part is when you apply it. So so just like if you have a degree in what's another one? Computer.
Or physics.
Some people have a degree in computer science, and some people have a degree in computer engineering. It's not the same, because the engineering part is the application of it, the application of the studies.
Right, that makes a difference.
It makes the difference. That is what carry over to the engineering component.
Definitely. And Richard Lawrence has a similar question to that which you just addressed. Will persons developing engineering standards and codes of practice, including the research for those standards, codes considered for registration? Is that considered as part of the experience?
Yes, that engineer is
Right.
engineering experience would be considered. You know, it depends on how involved you get, you know, because those who are on the academic side, and what is the result of the research? Did you do a paper? Did you do a presentation? Did you? So it's how involved you came. You got involved with that particular aspect. But remember, you may very well have the qualification. You are involved with an aspect of it, but how involved you get and what the results are, and what your studies. So if it's a very analytical and theoretical type and of study, yes, it is certainly something that would carry some weight.
All right, thank you very much, Gary. And final few questions, and just to reiterate, Engineer Adams asked again, the webinar is being recorded, and we will endeavor to have it uploaded to our YouTube page, and we will share that information via email to those who have registered. So we're going to do that. And the final two questions I have here, and I think this one, perhaps anyone can join in to answer this. The person mentions that there are manufacturing organizations that loosely use the title engineer for admin functions. Is there some deterrence from PERB standpoint? And I know certainly when engineer Heron comes on and speak about enforcement, this will come up, but I don't know if you want to address this currently, Gary or Raquel, or wait till engineer Heron makes his presentation.
The use of the, yeah, we recognize it. The media houses have studio engineer, sound engineer. We like to emphasize that to be a professional engineer. So it seems as if it will be difficult to manage that. What we do through the enforcement is that, however, if your company has the word engineering it, we are quick to come down on that. If in your own organization they give you that title, it will be difficult. We discourage it, but it's practically difficult.
It's very hard, yes. And which is why we emphasize, as Raquel mentioned earlier, it's about being a professionally registered engineer. And that is what we seek to stand out. Now, final question here, and even though I see another one coming in, is experience or training gained prior to the degree considered, such as an internship? I think it's a very good question. So this person is asking, if I have experience prior to my degree, is that considered?
No, it's not considered. The experience is post-degree.
Post-degree, correct.
And I want to clear up something. Those of you who study at the University of Technology and do a degree in construction engineering, and I'm gonna state very clearly and plainly, a degree in construction engineering is not equivalent to a degree in civil engineering. Right? It's not the same. If you want to be a civil engineer, you do a course of study in civil engineering.
Right. So
construction is just one part of civil engineering. It's not possible for you to be in a subset and be part of the main. And persons get very frustrated with the PERB process when they hear this. right?
Right. So that's a
it is,
very important distinction.
yes.
Right. Thank you very much for that, Gary. And the final question, how does the PERB system of registration comport with the NCEES system in America? I'm not sure if you're familiar with that system, where one has to be first an engineer in training. In other words, is there any sort of ease of transfer from being a professional engineer with respect to Jamaica, PERB, to being a professional engineer in the USA?
Mr. Anonymous, I don't know much about the NCEES. However, the training, no, we have reciprocity with particular states in CARICOM. So we have reciprocity with Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, most of the Caribbean countries. I am not aware with that facility with United States of America.
Yeah, if I may, Engineer Walters, I think the participant is referring to the practice in most states of the United States to have a category. It used to be called engineering training. So I think people, once they graduated, they did a test in fundamentals of engineering, and so there was a category called engineering training. And then there's another test that some states require, which is a professional engineering test, which you have to pass to become a professional engineer. So we really just have one category. We don't have any engineering training category at the moment. So that would be the comparison to our system. Okay,
thank you. Thanks, Mrs. Clark, or Registrar. In the interest of time, and I see one more question popping up here. Very quickly, I'm going to ask you to just address these quickly so we can move on to our next presentation in interest of time. So if you have any more questions, I'm going to ask to hold them a bit for me. I know this is a very important part. But Ryan Anderson asks again, is it possible for the board to institute 2 layers of registration? For example, professional engineer and an engineer by itself. This way, you would at least capture the people who have the qualification and have them recognized accordingly. Your quick response to that, Gary.
I'm not sure what because so that layer, what are we saying? What are they allowing them to do? Because people must bear this in mind, you know. A number of persons become registered and they get their stamp or their seal, and they're submitting drawings for buildings, for electrical works to the appropriate government entity, whether the municipal corporations, NEPA, NWA, wherever. And these are these drawings are what would be a record of the services carried out. PERB, having determined that you're competent to be a registered PE and carry out these services, would create some amount of confusion in the society with these 2 layers, because so you're saying one is competent. What's the other layer? That other layer is just have a record of just have a record of those who have qualification. I'm not sure.
Right. Well, Gary, Ryan just responded to say that what Mrs. Clark mentioned is pretty much what has helped to answer his question. It's pretty much just about engineering training, but you're correct. That additional layer wouldn't fit into what PERB is about in trying to regulate the industry. So until you have that experience with the qualification, then it really makes no sense having that layer of of registration, so to speak. And then finally, Marvin Moore asked if you have a BEng from UTech in construction engineering, then move on to complete a master's in structural engineering in the US, would that applicant be considered for a civil or structural category?
And once again, not civil, but the master's in structural engineering. What we do, we would ask for the transcript, and you look at the courses, and if it because you go, different schools do different programs. So if the transcript illustrate the courses cover the full range of structural, yes, that would be possible for structural only, but it couldn't carry all the way to civil.
All right, and on that note, Gary, thank you very much. Those responses were good. We had some good questions in this section. So those of you here with us, hopefully it's much clearer now. So you can start looking at the qualification you already have, the experience you have. If you have that 2 years, that would entitle you to be recognized for registration as a PE, then we want to implore you to start the application process. Those of you who may want to consider the special registration, we heard some questions about persons studying or practicing as lecturers at universities. Then you want to consider that, and if there's anybody here think that they can apply for temporary registration, then we want to implore that you start looking at. And as mentioned, you can visit our website. You can download the application form there. Our act, the Professional Engineers Registration Act, is also available on our website for download if you want to peruse that some more. It can also be found on the Ministry of Justice's website for you to get more information on what the act entails in greater detail. And as we come to our final presentation now, certainly by no means the least important, we are going to have Engineer Heron now speak about the implications of practicing without registration. You would have heard what the act entails. We just went through the process and requirements for registering. So we have a clearer understanding of who can be registered as engineers now. However, for those who want to ignore and continue the same old way and try to get under the radar and practice engineering without that recognition or registration, I'm going to invite Engineer Heron now to make his presentations on implication of practicing without registration. Engineer Michael Heron is a mechanical engineer, and he has over 40 years experience in industry. And he's a past student of the Woolmer's Boys School, went to what was previously called the College of Arts, Science and Technology, now UTech, and also a graduate of the University of the West Indies. And he's currently the Director of Air Conditioning Sales and Services at Arel Limited. And his experience includes design, project managing projects, production superintendent, as well as engineering manager. And as I mentioned, Engineer Heron is the chair of our Registration Act Enforcement Committee that we call REAC. So his committee looks at all those who are breaching the Registration Act and how they can correct that. So I am now going to turn over to Engineer Heron for his presentation.
Good morning. Hope you guys are still wide awake. All right, let's get into it because time is far spent. The importance of registration. It is important to be registered if you wish to practice engineering in Jamaica. Under the
Engineer Heron, if I can be sorry, can we get into the slideshow mode? Is it possible to get in that mode?
I think we're having a little problem why
Okay.
she's going this way.
All right, okay.
All right. So it is important to be registered if you wish to practice engineering in Jamaica. under the Professional Engineers Registration Act, PERB, it is illegal to carry on the practice of engineering in Jamaica if you are not registered. Section 15, subsection 2 and 3 of PERB define the practice of engineering. A person shall be deemed to carry on the practice of engineering if he practices any branch of the profession of engineering, or if by verbal claim, sign, advertisement, letterhead, card, or in any other way represent himself to be an engineer, or through the use of some other title implies that he's an engineer, or that he is registered under the act, or holds himself out as being able to perform or does perform any engineering service or work. For the purposes of this act, a person not being a registered engineer does not carry on the practice of engineering by reason only that A, he does so in the course of his duties as an employee of a registered engineer or an authorized organization. B, being an architect or land surveyor registered under such laws as may, for the time being, provide for the registration of architects or land surveyors, he engages in such engineering work as may be incidental to his practice as an architect or land surveyor, as the case may be. C, being an employee of the government who does not fall within the provisions of the second schedule, he does so in the course of his duties as such an employee. Attorney Forbes spoke to some of these issues already. Now, we spoke about the second schedule, and the second schedule lists the persons who may be specially registered as engineers. These include the city engineer at the KSAMC, which is the Kingston and St. Andrew Municipal Corporation, the superintendents of road and works at the municipal corporations, and persons on the staff of the University of the West Indies, University of Technology, or other institutions approved by the minister who are engaged in a teaching or research capacity in engineering work. Persons, second schedule continued, persons employed to the government in an engineering capacity and who satisfy the board that they possess the knowledge, experience, or qualification necessary to practice engineering in that service. This only applies as long as they continue to work in the same position for the particular organization for which they receive special registration. Implications of not being registered. 1, prohibited from practicing engineering or calling oneself an engineer. 2, liable for prosecution and fine or jail term if convicted. I bet you a lot of engineers didn't know, a lot of persons who are practicing engineer did not know that. And thirdly, unable to recover fees. Let's look at them individually. Prohibited from practicing engineering or calling oneself an engineer. Section 15, subject to section 16, with effect from such date as the minister may, by order, specify no person, unless he's a registered engineer, shall in Jamaica, A, carry on the practice of engineering, B, take or use in relation to himself the designation engineer, either alone or in conjunction with any other words or initials in such manner as to imply that he is qualified to carry on the practice of engineering in Jamaica. C, take or use in relation to himself any designation, title, name, initials, or description indicating or implying that he's entitled to carry on the practice of engineering in Jamaica. B, 16.1, section 16, subsection 1, no organization, B, shall engage in engineering work unless it has a valid certificate of authorization issued pursuant to subsection 2. Now, looking at all of these, what is important for all of us? We can get access to the law, PERB, by going to the PERB website, and you can pull up PERB and you can read the extent of what the act says. So all of this is listed in the act, and you can read it for yourself and be apprised, because if you are found wanting, then you will be called upon to explain why it is that you're not abiding by all of these rules and regulations. Let's continue with the implications of not being registered. Liable for prosecution and fine or jail term if convicted. Any person who contravenes the provisions of subsection 1 shall be guilty of an offense and shall be liable on summary conviction before a registered magistrate, A, in the case of a first offense, to a fine not exceeding $250,000, or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 months. B, in the case of a second or subsequent offense, to a fine not exceeding $500,000, or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 12 months. So persons who are performing engineering roles without being registered are going to be subject to these situations and cases, and find themselves in court and fines, and also possibly to be incarcerated for a time. Liable for prosecution and fine. Where are we? Where an organization contravenes the provisions of paragraph B of subsection 1 or subsection 6A, it shall be guilty of an offense against this section. And B, any person who at the time of the contravention was a partner or director, general manager, secretary, or similar officer of that organization, or was purporting to act in any such capacity, shall be liable to be prosecuted for an offense against the section, as if he had personally committed that offense, and shall, if on such prosecution it is proved to the satisfaction of the court that he consented to or connived at or did not exercise all such reasonable diligence as he might in the circumstance have exercised to prevent the offense, having regard to the nature of his functions in that capacity and to all the circumstances, be also guilty of an offense against this section. So what is being said here is that if a person carries on an activity, and now listen, now you can be a person acting to be an engineer, but you're not the owner, but you are also going to be held liable as well as the owner. So if there is a case like that happening now, you need to appraise your owner and let them know what the PERB says, and to fall and to come into good standing, be registered, so that you don't have all of these implications acting upon you. So continuing, we said subsection 12A, a person guilty of an offense against the section shall be liable or summary conviction before a registered magistrate to a fine not exceeding $250,000, or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 months. Implications of not being registered: unable to recover fees. Section 14, subsection 1 of the PERB, no person other than a registered engineer duly issued with a valid practicing certificate, or an authorized organization duly authorized under the provision of section 16, shall be entitled to recover in any action, any fee, charge, gratuity, remuneration, or other reward for services rendered or offered as a professionally qualified engineer or authorized organization. So if you are not a professional engineer, you cannot claim on your client for fees because you are not a professional, and the law will throw you out if you go to court immediately because you are not registered. Next slide. The Registration Act Enforcement Committee develops and carries out on behalf of the board and in collaboration with the Communications Committee strategies to encourage compliance with the Act. It also seeks to identify breaches or potential breaches of the Act and recommend enforcement actions depending on the circumstances. And you are also pointed to our engineering database. If there's a project going on and you want to comply with the PERB, and there are engineers on the projects, especially those who are leading the project, then you need to check and see if they are registered engineers or registered companies. So, and you can check it by going to the website listed there.
Thank you very much, Engineer Heron.
Thank you.
Straight to the point there, I think some heavy information has been shared. So we can see the implications of not being registered. PERB, the Act, as you know, falls under the laws of Jamaica. So you can see that the implications here are within what the law allows, and you've seen what the possibilities are in terms of fines or even jail terms. And we don't want to see anybody fall in that. So which is why we're here sharing information as well. So I have a couple of questions, and I acknowledge a raise hand by Lancelot White. So let me ask Lancelot to go first before I read the questions which are coming in. Lancelot, are you able to ask a question? I see his hand is down, so perhaps that wasn't, or maybe it was from before. But if you have a question, you can type in, if you may, Lancelot. Now, the first question I see rolling in, and kind of relevant on this particular presentation, it says, "Good morning, I'm a mechanical engineer. My projects are mechanical engineering based. However, in my organization, the registered engineer is a chemical engineer. Can he sign off on my projects and in extension, my application for PERB?" So Gary, you may also want to chime in on this. So this person is a mechanical engineer. They work in an organization where the registered engineer is chemical. Can this registered chemical engineer sign off on his mechanical projects? And can they be a proposer for his application to PERB?
Registrar Clark?
No, the chemical engineer cannot sign off on the application. It is a requirement that your proposer be an engineer in good standing in the category of engineering for which you're applying for registration.
Right, so that's very important. So even though this person is registered chemical engineer, his experience and training is not in mechanical engineering. So he would not be able to sign off on your the mechanical aspects of your projects. So that's very important to note. And as mentioned, to propose you for application or for registration with PERB, you will also need a mechanical engineer who can verify your experience and your qualifications. And a similar question from Jamie Che Newsom. I work for a company under a professional engineer. Am I allowed to practice engineering on similar projects outside of that company? That's a very good question, Jamie Che. Michael, are you want to try this one?
Yes, please.
No, Jimmy, you'd only be allowed to practice engineering on similar projects if you are registered, right? Assuming that the company you know work for, you work under a professional engineer who is of similar discipline as you. So whatever projects you would work on, then this person would be able to check your work, verify it, and sign such documents, such project documents as necessary. However, if you were to do any practice outside of the company and outside the supervision of this professional engineer, then you would not be allowed to carry on any engineering work. You would have to be registered first.
Or he can work under a registered engineer with the projects outside of the company.
That's correct. That's correct. So until you're registered, then you'd have to work on the supervision of a registered engineer. And the
In the same discipline.
In the same discipline. And we have a question from Joseph Harrison. He says, I take it that the act is now in full effect. Yes, it is. Is there a time frame? Is there a consideration for an amnesty period?
The law has been in effect since 1987. It's not a new law.
So it's not a new law, Joseph. So there will be no amnesty period at all, certainly not at this time. It is, as we mentioned, it's in full effect, and it requires that you follow all the requirements of the Act.
So we encourage you to make good right now. Legalize yourself immediately.
That's right.
At the time it was enacted, there was a kind of period in which people could be grandfathered in, but that period ended long ago.
Yes, that's correct. And we have another question here from Evan Bowen. Evan says, good morning. I'm a licensed electrician in the field with a bachelor's degree in industrial systems engineering. Do I meet the minimum requirements for a PE license or for PE registration?
Gary?
I'm sure Gary will tell you, Evan, that your experience would have to be requisite with your qualification, and you would have to have at least that 2 years minimum experience that we spoke about earlier, showing that you meet those requirements, right? So you have a bachelor's degree in industrial systems engineering. You mentioned that
an emphasis on design, electrical design.
On your design portfolio, your projects would have to have some heavy design component to that. So you would have to now investigate those to ensure that your projects and your experience meet those minimum requirements for registration. Peter AP Reed is asking, can you discuss the enforcement aspect of PERB and who is responsible for this? Well, we just heard from Engineer Heron, who is the chairman of the enforcement committee. His committee is responsible for enforcing aspects of the Act to address issues of
compliance
and compliance, that persons are in compliance with the Act, and so on. So maybe you can just reiterate some of what the committee does in a practical way, Michael, in the enforcement of the Act.
Well, we look at the area of not being compliant, and we will start dialogue with the company, the project team, and we would seek, a soft manner to try and get compliance. Failing that, then we will have to send it off to a disciplinary committee for action. So it's going to be a process of dialogue in the first instance, and there is going to be a time limit to the dialogue. But to ensure and to get compliance in every aspect of wherever there are breaches, the breaches should now be rectified. In other words, if there's no registered engineer working on the project, the project team will have to ensure that they are registered engineers or the company is registered, or whatever the PERB says, they must be found compliant in every aspect and form. And then if that is done, then they will be allowed to continue with the project.
Okay, thank you. And I see a raised hand by Leighton McCarthy. Leighton, would you like to unmute your microphone and answer a question? Mrs. Clark, are they able to unmute themselves?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But I don't see. Oh, Leighton. Let me see if I can.
Yes, I've seen a hand disappear a while ago, so I'm not sure.
All right, let me allow him to talk.
Yes, Leighton. I'm not sure if earlier Lancelot wanted to unmute his own. But okay, so while we do that, let me move on to the next typed question. This is from Veon. I hope I'm pronouncing your first name correctly. Veon McDermott. What is the penalty for late renewal of the practicing certificate, and a reminder sent out for such renewal? Or Registrar Mrs. Clark, maybe you can address this particular question here.
Practicing certificate invoices are sent out for practicing certificates each year, because practicing certificates are due first business day in January each year. So invoices are sent out each year, although we're not really obliged to. We do send out invoices each year. The penalty for late payment, well, currently the penalty is that you're not supposed to be practicing without a practicing certificate. So there's no other penalty apart from that right now, but I know that we would like to see amendments to the Act, which would introduce penalties for late payment of practicing fees.
Right, and by extension, I suppose a part of the penalty of not being able to practice would be that your name would not appear on the database of registered engineers. So if someone is searching and querying whether or not you are a PE, then your name would not appear in our database until all fees have been paid up. All right, so it seems our Leighton's mic is available to him. So Leighton, can you ask your question now?
I didn't want to ask a question. It was just an error. Okay,
no problem. All right, thank you very much.
May I add something to the point about the penalty for late payment?
Yes.
In my experience, the government prefers to have these provisions being uniformed across professions. And with the board attempting to amend the act, it may well be that for example, in other professions, in my profession, the penalty is 100% of whatever you would have paid to renew your certificate. So I know that will be a consideration by the drafters, that they may well impose that penalty as well in the PERB, where, you know, if you were to pay 25,000, for example, then if you don't pay, there would be a grace period, because that is what ensues in my act. There's a grace period of 2 months, and if you don't pay by the end of that grace period, then what you will have to pay is 100% more than what you would have paid.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Raquel. Right, so the next question, moving quickly, we're past 12 o'clock or cutoff time, so it's moving quickly. And the next question is from Rowena Henry. I have an industrial engineering degree. However, working in my position at PAJ, I mainly supervise construction and building management projects. What category would I apply for? Gary, that sounds like something for you.
Yes, she's doing construction, so she can do construction engineering, because that's what she says she's been doing.
Right.
Remember, construction is not limited to civil construction. You have electrical, mechanical. If that is where your experience is, she has the first degree in engineering, and she's so far been doing construction engineering.
Right, as long as she has the minimum years experience. And the next question here is from another anonymous attendee. I'm not sure it's the same anonymous person asking all these. I worked as a technical service representative over 3 years for a chemical sales company, but I'm no longer there. However, my supervisor or no one in the company was a registered PE. I have a BEng degree before working at a chemical sales company. While there, I worked on various projects, including bauxite and seawater treatment, from design to implementation and trial evaluation. Can I still apply using that experience, given that I left the company and presently working in a less design involved capacity?
All right, I would anticipate that this person knows a PE, and the PE that she knows, so it does not necessarily have to be someone who you reported to. It could have been the consultant that your company was using. It could have been a colleague that is a PE. Once they can verify that that is the role you perform and they're willing to sign the application, then you shouldn't have a problem. You see, part of the problem that some people have is that they graduate and they're not associated with anybody. So they didn't join the GIE. Because when you join the GIE, that is the first opportunity that you will get to meet other professional engineers. It's not that you have to be a PE to be a member of the GIE, but through that network, you would have met others, you'd have even gotten some form of mentorship. You'd have met other engineers professionally that could say, yes, I can attest that Miss Jane Doe was working at this company doing these type of engineering works. So I'm just gonna assume that yes, she does know other PEs that can attest that what she has stated is indeed correct.
Right, and your experience will always be experience, so it's not transferable experience at all. So once you have the experience and you can prove it, then that would be considered by the credentials committee when you apply. All right, okay, and here's a question from Lancelot White. He wants to know, is there a system for conforming with the professional status of those persons from other countries who claim to be registered engineers in their respective jurisdiction?
Yes, most countries are like Jamaica, where you have a database. You can check. So if it's the, I'm gonna assume the United States or Canada, you can check to see based on the province, state, county, if someone is registered, because they would have to submit their registration number, and you can check. I don't know if you go into the Far East now. Sometimes we use the the embassies to get information on schools and because they can point us at, in the very least, in the right direction. Ms. Clark, you want to add something?
Just to say though that remember now that although a person might be registered in a state in the US or a province in Canada or overseas, they still can't practice in Jamaica unless they're temporarily registered in Jamaica. So just to add that clarification.
Right.
Yeah, but we still check. I want to know if
Yeah, so there's a process of checking.
Yes, we do check. We do check
Yeah,
when
yeah, we want to know if you're honest.
when people apply, you know, when they apply for registration and they claim that they're a member, they're registered in another jurisdiction, we do check. We do check.
Right. So there's a process there. And final question from Marvin Moore. How long should a registered engineer be licensed or be registered in this case in order for that person to be considered a proposer, or how long I suppose for them to propose someone else's application?
Once you pay your fee.
That's right.
Once you pay, if you get your seal on a Monday, 1 minute, once
Once you are recognized as a PE, you can
yes,
propose
yes,
someone.
yes, it's an interesting question.
It is.
Like once you are now registered, you are afforded all the privileges of registration immediately.
Right. So that's it. So thank you very much for that, Gary, and thank you again, Michael, for your presentation. So in wrapping up now, want to thank everyone for participating, but just to reiterate some key points here for you. We don't understand the requirement for registration and what the PERB requires of you. You must have such qualification recognized by PERB. And I should mention that among the other committees that we have is the Engineering Programs Accreditation Committee, which looks at various programs throughout the world to verify their validity and whether or not they are accredited programs. So once you have your qualification that is recognized and you have that experience, which we have discussed in great detail, at the moment it's 2 years. There are considerations to extend that experience limit to 4 years, but at the moment, once you have that 2 years experience, then you would be considered. And as Gary would have mentioned in his presentation, that a part of the application process, in addition to completing the application form and getting it proposed and submitting your project details, is that there is a requirement for you to sit a test, because we want to ensure that persons understand the requirements of the Act. So the test is about the Act, about engineering ethics, which we expect people to abide by so that they can practice in good faith and in accordance with the law. And then Michael highlighted to us some of the implications of not being registered and what that means. And in the future, PERB, we're working on some other areas, another critical area that we want to do to pretty much comply with best practices internationally, is to introduce a continuing education portion. So for those of us who would have been registered for quite a while, we want to ensure that we keep sharp with our engineering, current engineering practices and standards. So we are working on implementing a continuing education program, and we have a committee which is putting such a thing in place. So persons will be entitled to get credits for engaging in, even webinars of this nature and more technical webinars. So that is what we're looking at. So want to thank you for staying with us. We are 15 minutes ahead of time, over the time that is. I would like to thank my panel, my fellow directors of PERB, starting with our chairman, engineer Omar McFadden Sweeney, who brought greetings and is still with us here, engineer Walters, engineer Heron, shall I say, honorary engineer attorney Raquel Forbes, for your presentations. They were very instructive and insightful, and I'm sure the information was well received. I want to thank you attendees for all the questions asked. All questions were, I think, in my opinion, very good questions, and we hope we're able to satisfy you in that regard. Also want to thank the support team behind this webinar. This is Eva Clark, our registrar, who you heard provide some answers. Mrs. Clark really helped to guide us along a lot. Lynette Bailey, other member of our secretariat, who has been instrumental in organizing this webinar. My committee members, Jolene and Norville and Renard, thank you very much for the support in getting this webinar up and out. And the question which has been asked a few times, this is our first webinar using this modern technology, and we hope to have more. It is being recorded, and so we will share this on our YouTube page, and we may put an update on our website. So please visit those. I think our YouTube is PERB Jamaica. If you do a search in YouTube, you'll find it there. So thank you very much for your participation. We look forward to seeing many applications coming in And we hope that we're able to provide you some information so those who may not yet be suitably qualified will now be on a path to get the correct type of experience and qualifications to join us. And those of you who may be seeking to employ engineers, you're now clear what it means to have a professional engineer on your team and the importance. So again, thank you very much for your participation, and we look forward to your feedback. Before we go though, Mrs. Clark, I think you had a poll, that a little survey that you wanted to conduct before we leave. Is it still possible for us to do that?
Survey will pop up. The survey will pop up in the in-person's webpage. Will pop up.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
yeah.
we want to.
So we just like to ask everybody, please, to answer the survey questions.
Right. So just answer the survey questions. Give us some feedback to see how we're doing. I know we had a little bumps here and there, but we thank you for your patience, and we look forward to seeing you again at future webinars. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you very much.